I love talking about internet history here on TikTok, but there's one story that I haven't told yet. And if the TikTok ban does stand, I want to make sure this one is at the top of all of our minds before then. So let's talk about Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, and the data leak heard around the world. Walk with me back to 2013. SCL Group is a global election management agency that's interested in seeing how psychological traits influence voter behavior. They're based in London with CEO Alexander Nix at the helm. And they're kind of popping in England. They have ties to the Conservative Party, the military, and even the royal family. They're spreading military misinformation campaigns and all kinds of shit, but they want more. They want America, baby. So later that year, they recruit this guy named Christopher Wiley. He'd worked on Obama's campaigns and had a whole team of psychologists and data scientists to help SCL figure all of this out. They start doing some experimenting in the Caribbean and Africa where data privacy laws are super lax, if they even exist at all. They're even getting tea from local politicians to help them out. Everything is coming up Millhouse, so to speak. And in the middle of all of this experimentation, Alexander Nix coincidentally meets Steve Bannon, who runs Breitbart. He also meets Robert Mercer, a right-wing American bigwig and mega donor. Once Steve and Robert hear Alexander's spiel about getting voter data, they are both locked in. Robert agrees to pilot a $1.5 million project with SCL to see if they can use voter data to elect Ken Cuccinelli as Virginia's governor. SCL fumbles the bag and Ken Cuccinelli loses, but Robert's still down to try to figure this whole voter psyche thing out. The catch is they need more data. What little information they were able to scrape together for Virginia's governor race is not even remotely enough to take this to a national level. They were looking at voting records and what was on people's grocery store receipts when they entered their phone number at the register. I mean, how much information can you really gather from that? SCL and Robert Mercer wanted to know if people were religious, if they were introverted, if they were depressed. They wanted to get into people's heads. But that kind of data was also really expensive, and if we know anything, it's that there is no one cheaper than a rich man. So where do we go from here? Well, they went to Cambridge University. Researchers there were using what people liked on Facebook to get a better feel for their personalities. They'd also created a little personality quiz app on Facebook to scrape additional data from users and their friends. The kind of data they were pulling and the way they were doing it was completely allowed by Facebook, by the way. But unfortunately, these researchers didn't want to work with SCL, so they had to find the next best thing, an unrelated Cambridge professor by the name of Dr. Alexander Kogan. Dr. Kogan basically ripped off these researchers' idea and created his own personality quiz app in 2014, but he was collecting a lot more data than they were. In exchange for $800,000 from SCL, Dr. Kogan made this app and told Facebook and its users in teeny tiny writing at the bottom that he would be pulling their data safely and anonymously for academic purposes. But it's a fun little quiz, like one of those BuzzFeed ones back in the day. Surely a little bit of data going to Cambridge University is worth the dopamine hit, right? About 270,000 Facebook users end up connecting their Facebook to this app and taking this quiz. And with the data that Dr. Kogan scrapes, he and SCL are able to gather additional data from over 50 million users who have never taken the quiz, never opened the app, probably don't even know it exists. Simply by being connected to those 270,000 quiz takers on Facebook, their data ended up in the hands of SCL and, by extension, Robert Mercer. These people did not consent to that. They never took the quiz themselves. There was no fine print for them to read, okay? Are you with me? And the kind of data they pulled was remarkably specific. I'm talking how agreeable are you? How neurotic are you? How many different times do you need to see the same lie to believe it? This shit went deep. Now that they have this data, Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon are all in. Robert invested an additional $15 million and put his daughter on the board. Steve Bannon also joined the board, but this was going to have to be an American company to play in American national elections. So the boys created this shell firm that was based in Delaware, and Steve Bannon was like, well, the company worked with Cambridge on this. Let's call the company Cambridge Analytica. A star was born. Technically, the whole situation was still illegal because the contracts were coming through Cambridge Analytica in Delaware, but Alexander Nix was still running everything from London. Plus, almost all of their employees were Canadian or European, but hey, election rules are for losers. They threw some Americans on the payroll for the 2014 midterm elections and got to work polling and running focus groups for North Carolina Republican Tom Tillis. They were also doing it for John Bolton's Super PAC and other conservative groups. These efforts, plus the personality quiz data and other cheap data they bought from brokers, won Tom Tillis a seat in the US Senate by just over 450,000 votes. So it worked. Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon were elated. So much so that when the 2016 elections rolled rolled around, they were ready to take it all the way. Cambridge Analytica signed on to work for Donald Trump and Ted Cruz's campaigns. They also low-key worked for Ben Carson, but for much less money. All of these candidates were campaigning against each other in the presidential primaries, sure, but why not work with as many of them as possible to up the profits? Cambridge Analytica was telling these candidates where to campaign. They were putting together target audiences for ads. They were predicting voter turnout. But not everyone at the company was down for this trajectory. I mentioned earlier that Christopher Wiley had campaigned for Barack Obama, so he and his team weren't really down to help get Trump or the Zodiac Killer elected. So Wiley and over half of his team decide to bounce. Shortly thereafter, what a coincidence, The Guardian publishes an expose talking about how Cambridge Analytica and Ted Cruz were using all of this Facebook user data that they'd gotten without permission. The Guardian blew the lid off of the whole operation, exposing Dr. Kogan, how the quiz worked, everything, and Facebook acted like they were shocked. Facebook's counsel was like, how dare they take all of our user data? We're definitely going to investigate this and make them delete all of it. They reached out to Cambridge Analytica several times telling them to destroy the data, and Dr. Kogan and Cambridge Analytica assured them that they did. Facebook never followed up with their investigation to ensure that Cambridge Analytica had actually deleted all of the data. With the help of Cambridge Analytica, Donald Trump is ultimately elected president, and Ted Cruz sticks around Washington, D.C. too, as we know. At this point, the company's on fire. They're getting people elected in Kenya, South Africa, Mexico, Malta, all sorts of places. And as a result, there's a little bit of chaos and social unrest in some parts of the world, but who gives a shit when you're making a ton of money, right? It isn't until 2018 that everybody has their come to Jesus moment. Christopher Wiley and a few other ex-Cambridge Analytica whistleblowers give the New York Times and the Observer receipts, proof, timeline, screenshots, fucking everything. As it turns out, Cambridge Analytica had never deleted the user data like they promised they would. In fact, none of the data that was still there was even encrypted, so it wasn't even being protected. They also find out that Alexander Nix had been in touch with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to see if he could gather up Hillary Clinton's deleted emails. Hashtag lock her up. Even worse, their findings make the British government worry that Cambridge Analytica may have influenced Brexit. The US government is worried that Cambridge Analytica helped Russia interfere in the 2016 elections. See, some employees at Cambridge Analytica had been in contact with this Russian oil company called Lukoil. They say that Lukoil wanted Cambridge Analytica's help with getting their customers to engage more at gas stations. But the whistleblowers were saying that Lukoil execs had been asking them weird-ass questions about how data was being used to target American voters. This coincided with those focus groups that I told you about earlier, asking people what they thought about Putin and Russian expansion into places like Ukraine. Lukoil wasn't directly run by the Russian government, but they were Kremlin-backed, so it was all a little sus. And at the time of these exposés in 2018, Facebook was already getting backlash. Fake news was rampant on that damn platform, and people also felt like they were getting a lot of Russian propaganda. So Cambridge Analytica's getting shit, Facebook's getting shit, it's basically a huge PR crisis. On top of all of this, I cannot believe this is getting even worse. A journalist from Channel 4 News goes undercover with Alexander Nix and his executives pretending to work for a rich Sri Lankan family that's trying to get certain candidates elected. I'm running out of time, so we will continue this in part 2. You are